music that you're hearing in the background is not from any Legend of Zelda game. It's a ripoff. Over the years, the Zelda series has consistently repeated and reinvented itself. Whether Link is roaming the fields, sailing the seas, or soaring the skies, our hero's journey is always one of courageously exploring the unknown in the spirit of adventure. And one of the many memorable things about these adventures that also repeats and reinvents itself is the music that scores Link's eternally recurring heroic quest. So, in order to show you how to pay respect through ripoff, we're going to check out some of the most iconic features of Zelda's legendary music. And for the purposes of our ripoff here, we're going back in time and we're going to party like it's 1998, because we're using the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask sound font to get that authentic Nintendo 64 sound. Let's hit it. The introduction is where a piece of music gets its opportunity to make a first impression on the listener. And the impression that we're aiming for is of the epic heroism and drama that one would expect from a Zelda game's overworld theme. But when it comes to first impressions in music, it's where a piece establishes its main ideas that will be expanded upon later. In other words, we're planting the proverbial sonic seeds that will naturally lend themselves to being cultivated to the type of musical plant that we're trying to grow. The three key musical elements to consider for this are rhythm, melody, and harmony. Like most Zelda overworld themes, our ripoff is built on a militaristic march rhythm, which is driven by a snare drum. The two main rhythms used by the piece that will help us evoke this march feel are introduced in the form of triplets and 16th note gallops. Having established our rhythm, next comes perhaps the most fundamental thing that will develop into a melody that captures the essence of Zelda, and that is this motif. A motif is a short musical idea that serves as a building block for the melody to develop upon. But we'll get into melodic development in the next section. For now, let's look at where this motif came from. It's actually a combination of two motifs that instantly brings Zelda to mind. First, you got, which is obviously followed by. So check this out. We get rid of all the middle notes in the second motif, and we rearrange the remaining notes into a different rhythm, and you get our motif here. Now keep the sound and shape of this motif in mind, because it's then repeated and transformed over the course of a 4-bar Andalusian cadence. Keeping the motif so easily recognizable in each chord establishes just how structurally important it is to the piece. The chord progression itself also closely resembles the introduction of the original Zelda overworld theme. The chords also allude to the foundational role that modal mixture plays in the piece, which will be expanded upon in the main melody. Modal mixture is when you borrow chords from another key. So the first three chords here are in the key of D minor, until the final A major chord implies the parallel key of D major. But this modal mixture is going to get a lot more complicated in the following hero section, where we start to develop our simple motif into a full melody. Let's listen. The original Zelda theme makes extensive use of modal mixture to create its heroic and dramatic sonic identity. While many of the overworld themes in Zelda games that came afterwards, such as Link to the Past Dark World theme and Ocarina of Time Hyrule Field theme, all reference this modal mixture in their own respective ways so they can communicate the essence of Zelda in whichever way suits the games they represent. As far as this piece goes, we're using all these different modes to develop our fairly harmonically neutral motif into a melody that expresses many different musical colors of various shades of brightness and darkness. Now, bright and dark are ultimately subjective terms, but they're commonly used to denote sharpened and flattened scale degrees respectively. To demonstrate, here's the first two bars of the melody as they are in Mixolydian. Fairly bright, right? If we sharpen the 4th and 7th scale degree, that puts it into Lydian, and it gets even brighter. It'll also lose its heroic quality, and it will feel more ethereal and dreamlike. On the other hand, let's put it into a very dark mode, Locrian. In this form, the melody now becomes dissonant and unsettling. So returning to the actual melody, as I said earlier, the first 2 bars are in D mixolydian, which develops the motif into a bright and heroic phrase. Only to bring a slight touch of darkness in the minor 3rd bar. Then, it borrows from the brighter Lydian mode, while albeit using the more tense parts of it. The opening mixolydian phrase is repeated again, but with an added harmony to the main melody, only to be followed by an extremely tense run-up in harmonic minor, with many dissonant passing notes, until the modality shifts into natural minor, back to harmonic minor, and finally resolving in the decidedly dark Neapolitan minor, otherwise known as harmonic Phrygian. Okay, but if all this talk about modes sounds like Hylian to you, let's take a step back from the music theory and look at the big picture of why we want this tapestry of dark and bright modalities in the first place. Though the overall feeling of the melody is supposed to be that of a hero's fanfare, it's by representing the contrast between the forces of light and darkness through the interplay of bright and dark musical modes respectively that we can demonstrate what exactly our hero is contending with. Because what need is there for a hero of light in a world without darkness? The other reason is that well-executed modal mixture can give a melody its own unique personality, while creating interest and help making it more memorable and iconic. So in a sense, my aim was to use modal mixture in a similar way to the original Zelda theme to further reference the musical legacy of the series. The second hero section is a variation of the main melody from this section, but with a fair few differences. Let's check it out. What's immediately apparent is that the orchestration is different. To create variety in the tones, the melody is now being played on the trumpet, while the strings that were playing it before are now playing the supporting harmony. Also starting from the 5th bar of the melody, an ocarina joins in to play a counter melody. The main melody in the first 4 bars is exactly the same as the previous section, but the supporting harmony is slightly different, veering more towards dissonance by having the harmony of the chords and the lead trumpet melody playing in different modes at the end. This dissonance is taken further when the ocarina melody enters. While the marching beat that they both play over is very rhythmically stable, these 2 melodic parts twist and wrap themselves around the rhythm in a constantly shifting pattern. Let's isolate these 2 parts over a metronome to make this clear. The purpose of this is to build more tension in the rhythm before the harmony follows suit and also becomes darker and tenser. You see, the 7th and 8th bar of this section resolve into a rather bright D major tonality, until the unexpected 9th and 10th bar come in to perform a variation of that resolving phrase, which works its way towards finishing in the much darker D Neapolitan minor tonality. That will set the piece up to transition to the following Dark World section. A common recurring theme in Zelda games is the idea of a dark world that contrasts a typical light world. This was first seen in A Link to the Past, where Link's journey takes him to the Dark World, a corrupted version of the Sacred Realm. Fittingly, the music here is much more foreboding compared to the standard overworld theme. In Zelda games that came afterwards, where the music became more adaptive to the player's interactions with the world, the music would often take a darker tone where appropriate. For example, Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess's Hyrule Field theme transition into a more sinister section when Link has encountered an enemy. Or in The Wind Waker, a cursed version of the Great Sea theme plays during the part of the story in which Ganondorf has placed a curse in the sea, making the night endless and the weather eternally stormy. So when I said earlier that I wanted to include darker elements to the main heroic theme, they were also intended to foreshadow this Dark World section, in which the darkness becomes the main focus of the theme. In terms of harmony, the tonic has been moved down a semitone from the various parallel modes in D to C sharp harmonic minor. This move down immediately darkens this section relative to the one that it follows. However, the movement within the harmony itself also adds to the tension by mostly vamping on tense chords. The peak of this tension building takes place in the dense and rapid chord movement in the last two bars. Now, all these fancy chords and chromatic movements aside, all you really need to know is that these chords are moving in mostly stepwise motion towards the B chord at the end, which is a dominant chord in the key of E major. This basically means that the first E chord in the next section will provide a real satisfying resolution to the tension that came before it. But before we move on to the next section, I want to talk about how the main ripoff motif that we covered earlier is used to make the Dark World section feel related to the heroic section of the piece, even though they both evoke such opposite things. Now, just by looking at the shape of each bar of the Dark World melody, it's clear that they're all based on a very repetitive melodic pattern. Each bar features two triplets in a row. The first triplet always starts on a note, moves down by a second interval, and then returns to that same starting note. The second triplet then climbs upwards to the highest note, which is held for 2 beats. When you compare the general contour of any of these bars to the main ripoff motif, you can see the similarity. The main motif's triplet resembles the first triplet of this Dark World motif, in that they both start and end on the same note with a lower note in between. Also, the main motif ends with a note that leaps above the triplet, which the Dark World motif also does, but simply with a different rhythm and the need to climb up the second triplet of notes to get there. I make this point to show the power that motifs have to form associations for the listener. If you remember from earlier, the main motif itself is already a compressed version of motifs from the original Zelda theme, and now our Dark World motif is a transformation of that transformation. But speaking of associations in music, we're going to explore musical associations in the following fairy section. Harmonically speaking, the fairy section is mostly diatonic E major, which is relative to C sharp minor, which is one of the modes used in the previous section. Not much else worth going into there. Structurally speaking, it provides a break from the relentless rhythm and shifting harmonies that came before, by simplifying the music overall and widening it spatially with the texture of the panning glittery harp, an instrument that we have not used until now. Earlier, I said that I wanted to focus a discussion of this section on musical association, and the prominent harp and the arrangement in general are central to that. There are 2 major associations that the harp has in Zelda lore. Firstly, it's been included in the arrangement of every single fairy fountain theme since it first appeared in A Link to the Past, and thus has an association with fairies. Secondly, every version of Zelda's theme, from Ocarina of Time onwards, also heavily featured the harp in its arrangement. Interestingly enough, Ocarina of Time is also the game where Zelda herself was first seen playing the harp. Spoilers. Zelda also plays the same harp in Skyward Sword, in which it's revealed to have ties to the goddess Hylia. So what do Princess Zelda, fairies, and goddesses all have in common? Well, they're all divine feminine figures who are associated with magic and mystery, and they use that to imbue Link with their powers, to enable his transformation from that wimpy boy with 3 heart containers to a holistic and worthy hero who's fit to save Hyrule. He's got like at least a dozen heart containers. Though Link's heroism may be founded on courage, it's not enough alone to withstand the power of Ganon's boundless ambition. It must be integrated with the wisdom of Zelda and the other mystical feminine figures. Philosophically speaking, this musical section isn't just here to provide a break from the other more upbeat ones, but also to represent the mystical support structure that consistently enables the various Links to become the heroes of legend that they're destined to be. Getting back to musical associations in the fairy section, the melody is primarily led by the ocarina, an instrument that no one would question is associated with Link. Yes, there's strings and horns that support the harmony beneath, but they mostly rhythmically blend and move conjunctly with the ocarina's melody. Other than the occasional snare drum flourish, the biggest contrasting element is the twinkling sound of the harp that envelops the melody and gives it a much more enchanting and mystical quality that evokes the magical essence of Princess Zelda and the fairies. Okay, so Zelda's a darling and everyone loves her, whatever. Let's check out the coda. When considering the overall structure of the piece, the introduction's only going to play once, and then the coda is designed to have the piece loop in-game all the way back from the hero section. In a lot of ways, the coda functions similarly to the introduction, in that it teases the main motif before the hero section expands it into a full melody. Also, the music starts building back up its energy after having slowed down in the previous fairy section. But speaking of the coda helping build up to the main melody, in order to make it loop successfully, we're going to need to get the tonic back in a D. As you may remember, we've dropped down a semitone to C sharp since the Dark World section. This happens in the last two bars, where the G sharp 7, dominant functioning chord that wants to return to C sharp, is pushed up one more semitone to A7, which is the dominant chord of, and thus wants to resolve to D major, which happens to be the first chord of the hero section where the loop begins. Additionally, since the loop always starts by going up a semitone, the melody always comes back feeling rejuvenated with a new energy. Now that we've broken down what's gone into each section of the piece, let's check out the whole thing. I hope you've enjoyed this ripoff and learned something new about Zelda music or the creative process. Who knows? Maybe you've even gotten some ideas about how to take inspiration from the fantastical sounds of Zelda into your own music. Either way, if you enjoyed the video, do me a favor. Like, comment, subscribe, tell your friends, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, thanks for watching Ripoff Artist. I'll see you next time.